You're listening to BBC Radio 4. It's time for any questions. In the chair is Jonathan Dimbleby.
Welcome to the Queen of the Moorlands, more prosaically known as Leek in Staffordshire, now an attractive market town that was once renowned for its textiles, William Morris being a great influence here, and for its role in the arts and crafts movement of the early 20th century. The town now boasts several sporting Olympians, among them the para-gold medalist in equestrianism, Lee Pearson. Our host here is Westwood College, a mixed comprehensive with some 850 students. On our panel, Emma McBride was born in Liverpool in 1976, but brought up in Ireland. After school, she studied drama in London, followed by a decade of temping and travelling. In 2004, she wrote a novel, which was duly turned down by every major publisher. 10 years later, however, a small publishing house in Norfolk saw the light. And almost at once, A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing won the 2014 Bailey's Prize, formerly the Orange Prize, which is worth some £30,000. Her second novel, The Lesser Bohemians, you might imagine, was not turned down. It came out a couple of months ago. With Emma, three familiar voices on this programme: the former Transport Secretary, now post-Brexit Conservative Party Chairman, Sir Patrick McLauchlan; the former Home Secretary, David Lord Blunkett; and the yet again politically reincarnated, albeit in interim form, leader of UKIP. I was about to say Mr. Nigel Farage, but since we talk about your transatlantic buddy as President-elect Donald Trump, would you prefer to be known as Baron-in-Waiting Nigel Farage?
I think there's more chance of me going into the jungle with "I'm a celebrity, get me out of here" than becoming a member of the House.
I'd really like that, Nigel.
If it were you to be offered a peerage, would you accept it?
A, it's not going to happen, and B, it's not what I would want in my life at this moment in time.
You'll wait a bit.
Did you get this moment?
Yeah, everyone heard this
David,
moment.
when I'm old, I might think about it.
Okay,
When
we'll
you're
leave it.
53.
We'll leave it there and remind ourselves it's our panel. And our first question, please.
My name's Martin Sidley. 10 days into President-elect Trump's transition, have panel members recognised any positives?
Patrick McLauchlan.
Gosh. Well, I think that perhaps the positives, first and foremost, we've got to acknowledge that he won the election very well in America, and perhaps a lot of people weren't expecting it. But he is going to be the next president of the United States. And I think the positives I've recognised is the way in which he has already rowed back on some of the commitments that he was saying during the campaign, which I think is actually quite important. Whatever one thinks of President-elect Trump, he is going to be the President of the United States for the next 4 years. He's going to be very important in world affairs, and it's very important that we as a country work with him and get on with him.
You hope he keeps on rowing back, yes?
Well, I think what part of the problem, if one looks at American politics in a way, is lots are promised during the election campaign, and then the American people get disappointed with him. And I think that was very true as well as President Obama, where a great anticipation was stored up as to what he was going to deliver in office. And he found actually in office he was held back, he would say, by both the Congress and the Senate. So it's far too early yet to see how the new president gets on. He doesn't get inaugurated until the middle of January, and then we've got to work with him and work with the people that he appoints, and the appointments are going to be very, very important. And they're starting to trickle out today.
You mentioned that, and he's this very day has told us three new appointments, quite very senior appointments. The new Attorney General, Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions, who joked not so very long ago saying that the Ku Klux Klan was okay until he learned they smoked marijuana. Is that kind of encouraging? Or let's take the Lieutenant General.
You're stealing my speech here.
Okay. I want to hear what the minister has to say, cabinet minister has to say. And retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, National Security Advisor. Islam is a political ideology that hides behind a religion. Fear of Muslims is rational.
No, I don't agree with those things, and I think they're very disturbing indeed. But we're not going to stop the appointments, and the truth is that President Trump is going to be in charge of the United States for the next 4 years, and it's our job as a government to work with the United States and to make sure that where we've got reservations, we express them, but we work with the United States.
Nigel Farage.
Well, he likes to meet people. That's a very good thing, isn't it? He met the Japanese Prime Minister today. He's spoken to over 50 world leaders already, and he doesn't take office for another 8 weeks. And I must say, whatever people in this room think about Putin and the way that he runs Russia and how journalists disappear and all the rest of it, the Trump approach, I think, to Putin and to Russia is really interesting, and yes, massively positive. We have spent the last few years provoking Putin in every possible way we can by saying to the Ukraine, why don't you join the European Union? Why don't you join NATO? And what we've learned in terms of his reaction is that if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, he reacts. What Trump wants to do is fly to Moscow to meet him. He believes that jaw is better than war. That, I think, is good. And on a rather smaller level, I think for our country, and for goodness sake, over the last 100 years, just think of the triumphs and tragedies that we've shared together with America. We've had 8 years of a president who didn't think very much of us and frankly looked down his nose at us. We've now got a president that believes in this country, loves this country. His mother is Scottish. The only investments he has in the world outside America are indeed in the United Kingdom. And the big positive, I think, is we've got a chance here to forge a trade relationship with America to the benefit of both of us.
You talked about the president who will be very soon standing down, and you described him as that Obama creature.
Jonathan,
this is a direct quote from you.
Yeah,
Loathsome
I know,
individual.
I
I want
know,
to ask you this. Was that kind of picking up on the Trump language, or is that deeply embedded in you
no,
as a feeling?
I accept, Jonathan, that you think all humour should never be allowed in any circumstances at all. It was a late night. It was a late night joke, phone-in, show with James Whale, who does wacky, way out there stuff. Look, Obama has been against this country. We now have a president who is for this country. And as Patrick says, whatever we think of statements he made in the campaign, the fact is, on January the 20th, he becomes the president. Let's get on with it. Let's make it a success.
David Blunkett.
Well, I don't know where to start. The three appointments that Jonathan referred to today are in themselves extremely worrying. And the difference between somebody like Donald Trump and Ronald Reagan is that people around Ronald Reagan were experienced, were people with some credibility. But when you appoint an Attorney General who is frankly a racist, and when you have the head of strategy, which you didn't mention, Jonathan, who is involved in all sorts of things, including the manosphere, as it's called, which is a dark web site, which is homophobic, which is misogynistic, which is frankly racist. These things are extremely worrying because it's an indication of the direction of the United States. Now, on foreign policy, who knows? He may appoint, apparently, someone sane to be the Secretary of State, i.e. the Foreign Secretary. Let's hope so. But Gingrich, who's very close to him, you might remember him, he is a voice from the past, called the states that are most at risk from Putin the suburbs of St. Petersburg. And I think we just are at the most incredibly dangerous moment in world history since the Second World War. And we need to recognize that. And if being nice to Putin turns out to be a good thing, Nigel, I'll be the first to acknowledge it. But actually being weak with Putin is more likely to gain exactly the opposite outcome. And so literally, let's pray, because we are affected as much as the rest of the world by what Donald Trump will eventually do.
Well, yeah, but I mean, come on. It's very interesting. It's very interesting that you come out with labels. You accuse his chief of staff, of his chief strategist, of being homophobic, anti-Semitic. I know this bloke. I've never seen anything of the kind.
Well, you don't read his websites,
No,
do you?
well, I
The
do,
forums.
and that's the point. And actually, you could accuse him of being anti-Palestinian. Don't believe all the negative publicity you get about these people. The point is, folks,
would you
there has
rather,
been a sea
Nigel,
change.
just
There has
take
been a
one
sea change
particular
in
thing he
politics,
said, one of the particular
and
things he said,
liberal
Nigel.
establishment
Nigel.
and political class can't accept what's going on.
The Chief
game
Strategist
has
did,
changed.
as Chief Executive of Breitbart News,
Yep.
the person we refer to, Chief Strategist now, amongst several headlines which caused a degree of, how can I put it, consternation, would you rather your child had feminism or cancer?
Yes, and the point is, Jonathan, just like the BBC runs all sorts of stories, it's a news website. It publishes opinion from a wide range of people. It doesn't necessarily endorse them. And I think, frankly, the way we're trying, basically what's happened is we're trying to demonise the change, whether it's Brexit, whether it's Trump, and there is an establishment that can't accept it. Well, all I can say is get used to it, because there's more to come.
Emma McBride.
I think it's very hard to look at anything positive that's come out of this. I think when the world is in a position of hoping that the candidate lied about what he was going to do when he got into office is a very depressing position to be in indeed. And this is quite a different position from the creature Obama and the weight of expectation that was laid on his shoulders through hope that people wanted there to be a better world. They wanted to believe in inclusivity. They wanted to believe that the racism in their country had been, if not extinguished, had certainly been nullified in some way. And the reversal of all of this by an angry, racist, bigoted, misogynistic candidate who we can only hope doesn't carry through with his campaign promises is not comparable in any way. And I think when it comes to Putin, history shows us that appeasement does not work.
On Putin, which we just discussed just briefly on this, Patrick McLaughlin, as Nigel Farage says, George Orwell's better than war, and is highly critical of the approach taken by the West hitherto, and supports Trump's stance in the approach to Putin. What do you make of that stance at the moment, as you understand it?
Well, at the moment, I think it is the wrong stance. I mean, the reason why, not just this country, but the rest of Europe and the United States up until now have taken the view they've taken against Putin is because of the things that we've seen him doing, particularly in Syria and the like. And that's what's caused there to be a united front right across all European leaders and also the United States. But as I say, he is elected, he is going to be president, we're going to have to work with him, we're going to have to work with his administration, and that's what we will do. OK, thoughts on that? Any answers? Number to ring, 03700 100 444. After the Saturday broadcast of this programme, Anita Anand will be there for all your thoughts on any of the questions that we discuss. And you can email any.answers@bbc.co.uk. Could we go to our next, please?
My name is Richard Mace. Brexit is a complex pack of cards. Should we show our hand?
Brexit means Brexit, we are told. Nigel Farage.
Well, probably not, no. And I mean, I have to say, since Theresa May became Prime Minister, although she backed the other side, which I found rather strange as a reason for making her Prime Minister, but everything she's said has been great. Now, her track record on delivery isn't great, but everything she said has been great. But when you go in to negotiate in those corridors in Brussels, and David knows them well from his time and his experience, the last thing you do is to tell the world exactly what your negotiating position is going to be before you get there. That would be a completely mad thing to do. Nobody would do it in the world of business, so why on earth would you do it in this world? So really what we're talking about here is we've got the Supreme Court going to rule on the 5th of December. I would assume they're going to uphold the decision of the lower court, and then we have a question of what happens in Parliament. I'm actually optimistic. I think that the Labour Party have seen sense on this now. They realise that in areas like this, where they've been Labour seats for years, but a majority of Labour voters voted for Brexit, if they were to try in any way to tie the Prime Minister's hands, their seats would be at risk in 2020, or maybe even before. So I'm optimistic this will get through the House of Commons. What I don't know is what will happen when it gets to the House of Lords. And it seems to me there is a massive inbuilt establishment Europhile majority in the House of Lords, who of course do not have to submit themselves to the electorate. All I can say is that if the House of Lords tries to bind Theresa May's hand, tries to make her show her cards and put them on the table, I think there'll be huge public anger, and I hope, in the sake of the national interest, that it does not happen.
David Blunkett.
Well, firstly, I ought to make it clear that I don't think the House of Lords should block the will of the people or the House of Commons. We're not elected. We can revise, we can argue, we can put up sensible debate, but we shouldn't in any way attempt to block what the people have decided. Secondly, there's a big difference between not showing your negotiating hand and actually being unwilling to come to the very Parliament that you, Nigel, argued should be sovereign. And we've already seen some of the hand, have we not, with Nissan and the decision that was made there. Other parts of our economy, our businesses, our financial services will expect the same sort of response. Now, you can do that in a way that doesn't give everything away.
So what
but you've got to at least respect the parliamentary process in that regard.
In that case, what do you think parliamentarians, without, as it were, giving negotiating hands away, are entitled to be told in relation to the negotiating hand that she will go in to negotiate with?
Well, I think, firstly, business need to know whether we've abandoned the idea of remaining in the single market.
But that's what we voted. That's what we voted to leave,
well,
David.
That's fine.
I mean, it couldn't be clearer.
And if they know that, what other parts of our trading arrangement that are not subject to the single market are we going to endeavour to hold on to, or are we out completely and therefore subject to the trading tariffs and the impositions that would actually cost business a great deal to trade with Europe?
But
those are real questions.
Hang on, David.
This is not rhetoric. This is
but your
emotion has won.
But you're rerunning the referendum.
No, I'm not. Your emotion has won.
Look,
You've won the referendum.
You said to me, Parliament is sovereign. No, it's not. The people of this country are sovereign.
Well, that's very interesting.
The people of this country have spoken.
I study politics and philosophy. I teach it at the moment at the University of Sheffield. We all know about Thomas Hobbes, those of us who have studied it, all the way back. There's been a debate about whether there is such a thing as sovereignty of the people that isn't reflected in their parliament, in those they elect to do it. You can't have it always. You wanted judges to be subject to our laws. Now you don't want judges to actually rule.
No,
you
David,
wanted Parliament to be sovereign.
David,
now you don't want Parliament to be sovereign.
This is all wheedling around.
No, it's not wheedling at all. It's just true.
The fact is, there's one thing that could not be clearer. Both sides, both the Remain camp and the Leave camp, made it clear we are voting to leave the customs union that is called the single market. We're going to be free. And if Parliament in any way tries to change that, there will, I repeat, be real public anger.
Wow.
Let me bring in Emma Farage. Emma McBride.
I think that, what's about to happen is there to protect us. It is there to protect the people. Parliament should be there to serve us. Obviously, Brexit is going to be what it is, but at the same time, I think we have a right to know what it is. Brexit means Brexit doesn't really mean anything very specific. And I think given the gravity of the situation, what is facing the country, we the people should know what exactly it's going to mean and not be waiting for Boris Johnson to say something rude to someone in a Czech newspaper. I think, we the people are entitled to know what is going to happen to our country, what we will be expected to live with, what the possible outcomes are going to be. So I think, this is a fight for us.
How much beyond Brexit means Brexit, or most recently at Prime Minister's questions, we do have a plan and it's on track, is the parliamentary group in the House of Commons entitled to know before they approve, as they've indicated, most of them they will do, the triggering of Article 50, Minister?
Well, when EMEA says what does Brexit mean? Brexit simply means that we're going to leave the European Union. As Nigel said, there was a referendum. All the parties actually signed up in the end to a referendum. It was promised in the Conservative Party manifesto. When it was debated in Parliament, the Labour Party did not vote against it and so accepted that there would be a referendum. The people on the 23rd of June gave an answer which I preferred they hadn't have done, but they did. And now it's got to be implemented, and implement it we will. So what sort of parliamentary scrutiny is there going to be? Well, this is the first time any country has ever left the European Union. So we are actually in new uncharted territories. But the Prime Minister has made it clear she wants to serve Article 50 by the end of March. That gives us a 2-year timetable in which to complete the negotiations. During those 2 years, there's going to be a huge amount of parliamentary debates, parliamentary questions. There's select committees which will look into the whole issue and question ministers as we make that progress. But to actually come out and say exactly what our negotiating position is anyway through that will mean that we get a worse deal, I believe, for the United Kingdom.
Does that
mean...
So
it is something where you have to... Just let me finish
Sorry,
this.
okay.
It does mean that you have to trust the Prime Minister. And I think the Prime Minister has got a very good track record. As Home Secretary, she quite often was told that she would not be able to achieve things as Home Secretary, which she did. But she went about it and didn't shout about it in the beforehand, getting rid of terrorists from this country, which previous Home Secretaries had failed, David.
Jonathan, this time.
No, I was thinking of David Blunkett.
David Blunkett. Oh, sorry, don't addressing me. I'm very happy to be addressed as David. Nothing make me happy.
I started the process, and she finished it off. Although she's left quite a lot of googlies for her successor, has she not?
I think we'll leave the googlies there and stick with this for a minute. Stick with this for a minute. So it's very important. This parliamentarians be interested to know. So what you're saying is they should not know whether it is the objective to be inside the single market, outside the single market, inside the customs union, which of course is distinct, or outside the customs union. That's part of negotiating hand, not part of an objective that should be open and shared?
Well, of course, we want to make sure that we are a country that people want to invest in. And actually, you know, this week we've had some incredibly good news with Google saying that they are going to choose the United Kingdom, London, as their base for over £1 billion investment. That is incredibly encouraging news. It was encouraging news a few weeks ago when Nissan said that they were going to build their new models here. So I think there's a lot that we've got to
I'm sorry, forgive me interrupting this time. Forgive me interrupting this time, but forgive me but it's a very critical thing, as you know, many of your fellow MPs want to know, business wants to know, they want to know now because of the uncertainty. The people who are going to vote want to know one way or another what the objective is. You're saying they don't need to know whether or not the intention, the goal will be to be inside or outside. We have Foreign Secretary saying our plan is having our cake and eating it. Isn't it an indication that you don't know yet what you want?
It's an indication that we're not going to give a running commentary on the negotiations once they get underway. Those negotiations haven't yet got underway. They'll get underway once Article 50 is served, but we won't give a running commentary. But of course, we're going to go in there to negotiate the best deal we can for the United Kingdom.
You'd hardly be negotiating the worst deal, would you?
Well, of course we will. But the best deal will be what we will be recommending, what we'll say we've been able to achieve. And the simple fact is that we want our businesses and our industry to have as much access to Europe, but those European industries also want access to our markets too. So that's why we'll be in a situation of negotiations.
What do you think, Richard Mace? You asked the question.
I just feel that there are two issues at stake here. If we were a business, if the United Kingdom were a business, you wouldn't show your hand for obvious reasons. But we are a democracy, and therefore these things need to be debated openly. So actually, if you start moving backwards, why have we had a referendum on something that hasn't been thrashed out and that we're unclear about? Why are we having these debates now? And I feel that politicians have actually let us down. This sort of stuff should have been ironed out before we had the referendum.
And we... And let's be clear, those of us who were in favour, some of us more reluctantly than others, to argue for in, also let you down, because we did not argue the case at all well in terms of where power lies internationally what globalization means, and instead of rejecting it, coming together to be able to counterweight it, so that those big companies that currently are on the verge of running the world, including the United States, Nigel, actually would be counterweighted by our democratic processes. We didn't argue that case. We were absolutely useless, and you won.
We will leave it there with
Good.
a note that from among the tweets, there's likely, this is referencing to what Nigel Farage said, there's likely to be as much anger she doesn't show, she even has a hand. And May doesn't want to show her hand because it's full of jokers.
Well, not showing a hand is one thing, but being clear about the objective is the other. And I think what I fear, as somebody who wanted us to leave, and we've talked about European business tonight, there's a great big world out there. Since we voted to leave, 24 countries around the world have come to us to say, please, can we start talking about how we do business better and more clearly? So the one thing I want, you're quite right, don't show the hand, but she needs to make it clear to the British people that we are leaving this clogging customs union that bans us from making our own arrangements in a modern global economy.
We will leave it there and go to our next.
My name's Shona Mountford. What can be done to make sure working class children are given the same opportunities as middle class and upper class children to further their education?
This week, Alan Milburn, who chaired the Social Mobility Commission, reported saying that the rungs on the social mobility ladder have grown further apart. It's becoming harder for this generation of struggling families to move up, and cited a whole series of evidence to sustain that observation. Emma.
Well, I think it's a very difficult thing, social mobility in this country, and it has become increasingly so as the sort of unceasing waves of austerity have hit the people who could afford to live with it least, the hardest. I think talk of bringing back grammar schools is not a good thing. I think that there needs to be more incentive for good teachers to work in working class areas. There needs to be more effort put into failing schools and a lot more money put into those. I think that, children who have free meals have hardly any occasion to get into Oxbridge is an outrage. And I think the problem is having a government that does not understand what it is like to live with the waste and the pain and the shame of poverty, of how it destroys people's lives, it destroys their confidence, it destroys their ability to see beyond their own circumstances. Because I think there are probably not many people in positions of power in this country who know what it's like to live on a credit card and then to live in the fear of life on the credit card. And what that does to families, what it does to their ability of parents who have to work all hours God sends in order to just pay the bills, to just get by, is a disgrace. And so I think there has to be more representation of working class people in this country. And I'm not sure how. I'm not really sure how that can be done, apart from people speaking out and refusing to be ignored. And I find that frightening. But since there are so many people happy to speak out about, their terrible bigotry and racism these days, perhaps the one positive of this is that we should all be encouraged to be a lot louder about what we're concerned about. And this is definitely one of the most important issues that's facing this country now, and will be after Brexit as well.
Patrick McLaughlin.
I think one of the ways that we help people with social mobility is to give young people opportunities. And the way in which they get opportunities is through education. That is a very important area which opens up the opportunity for young people to get the ability to either go to university or to get onto good apprenticeships. And that is something which I think all parties want to see this happen. And I actually believe that one of the things that David Blunkett did when he was Education Secretary was to push forward with academies. And I think academies are a good move for education. We have sports academies, we have engineering academies, we have arts academies. I don't see what's wrong with having academic academies either. And you could call them grammar schools. I call them letting people have that opportunity, if parents want to send their children to those schools, exactly that. So that they get those options, so they get those opportunities. And it's not right to say that, the government has nobody who's come from a working class background. I don't want to go on about my background, but I think it was fairly working class. My father died the day after my 7th birthday. I was brought up by my mother. She was going out to work every single morning so that she made enough money to bring up her family. So that ranges right across politics. And I think we're all concerned that we're not getting the kind of social mobility that we seem to have had 20, 30 years ago. Yet, the access to things like the internet, the access to those kind of availability to young people to get that kind of education is much, much wider than it was 40 years ago. So I think it is one of the big challenges that we've got to face, and we've got to give help and support. And we've done lots of things like people premium for those children receiving free school meals and the like. It's not just a matter of finance, it's also a matter of parents having the ambition as well and supporting their children.
Parents have to have the energy to have ambition. They have to have time to spend with their children, where they're not spending it, stacking shelves and doing all this work just to keep going.
Absolutely.
And there may be some working class people in your party, but you have treated the working classes pretty shabbily.
No, I don't accept that.
In the last 2 years. And I think to turn around now and say, well, I'm a working class person, doesn't really excuse you for what your government has done.
I don't accept that at all. And I think you also decategorise people by saying working class. Some people who are working class are doing the kind of jobs that a lot of people don't want to do, and they're absolutely essential jobs that make our economy work, make our country work. So I don't quite patronise them in the way some people on the left do.
I don't think it's patronising to suggest that working class people find menial labour menial. I'm sure they would all like to have nice, comfortable jobs that earns them lots of money for sitting in an office all day. I think, to be honest, you have to talk about what people's lives, what they have to do in order to make their lives function, what they have to do and how they feel about that, how it makes them feel about themselves, what it allows them to have left of their life, to give to their children, to give to any aspect of their life that isn't just about trying to scrape a crust together.
Patrick McLaughlin, you touched in what you were saying on social mobility, and you referred to the importance of grammar schools because it gave more parental choice. With other schools, that is by itself enough, but with grammar schools, the schools select the pupils on the basis of a range of qualities, notably their academic potential.
Yeah, now how do they get into some of the academies which are specialist in certain areas? The schools select, parents support, parents give that help and assistance.
What do you have in mind?
Well,
which academies?
Not too far away from here, there's the JCB Academy, which is a fantastic academy, a fantastic broadening out of opportunities.
There's a slight reaction in the audience here to what you're saying.
David Blunkett, you were cited in...
Well, this is a great school, and people should be proud of it. And we know what the ingredients are, so we've got to put them in place. We've got to restore Sure Start, which was the nurturing of children from the very moment they're born. We've got to have first-class leadership and teaching in the classroom, which is the fundamental of improving education. We must never promise to the many what we know we're only intent on delivering to the few. And that's the big problem with selection, that if you're only going to promise, if you're only going to deliver to 25% of the students, if you're going to exclude the parents and children, in doing that, you're bound to end up with a divided society, and you're going to end up with a society which maybe after the Second World War worked in terms of needing a particular cohort who were highly educated, and the idea of the trickle down, that doesn't wear at all in the global economy we're facing today.
David, if grammar schools are so terrible, why, when 13 years of a Labour government with unparalleled majorities didn't you get rid of grammar schools?
Because they're
still around
Yep.
in this country, and
Yep.
they're available in
Yep.
certain areas of the country.
They are.
So if they're so bad, why did you not do anything about them?
And I've been very clear about this, and we took it to our party conference back in '96, 20 years ago. 163 grammar schools, well, there were 165 actually, two went in Bristol by choice. 163 grammar schools. Why divert all our attention and energy from raising standards for every child in every school and instead concentrate on that bygone spasm of the 1950s? And here's the truth. Here's the truth about grammar schools, but it's true of schools generally. We've got to invent new ways of facilitating what's available to the better off to those who are not. And that includes tutoring outside school. Over 40% in state schools have had some tutoring. It's about 70% in the private sector, by the way. People pay to go to the private sector, and then they pay for tutors. We need to have outreach to parents, because why are the white working class boys doing worse than any other single group in this country? It's because we're not reaching the parents, inspiring them as well as the children to the future. And finally, because I know you want me to shut up.
Who said that?
We've got, when the children get to the choice of going on into post-16, to restore the education maintenance allowance, which I was proud to introduce. And we've then got to give ladders so that young people who take on a lousy job, pay-wise and prospects-wise, have a ladder out of that for lifelong learning. That is the way in which you inspire people out of poverty and into self-reliance. That's what we should do.
Well, Nigel Farage.
Yeah, I mean, David, it's all sounded fantastic for 20 years. The problem is, we get back to our questioner, it hasn't worked.
No, there's been enormous improvement. There's been enormous improvement.
The gaps in social mobility between the top and the middle and the bottom have got wider. We have 7% of people in this country whose parents can afford private school. They are now dominating the media, politics, the arts, sport in a way they haven't done, ever. There's something wrong.
No, they always have.
Well, I'm afraid they are.
They always have. No, I said they always have.
Well, you look at the England cricket team, you look at the Olympic gold medal winners, you go through the list and see the dominance of this 7%. No, I think it depends a little bit where you live. There are parts of this country with great comprehensives that genuinely give bright pupils the chance to get on and achieve their best. There are also vast swathes of this country where, for all sorts of reasons, if you're the very brightest, you will be held back because of a type of school and the type of area that you're in. I think abolishing the grammar schools was actually the biggest social mistake we've made in this country in the last half a century. I have been saying this on these platforms on Jonathan's programmes for 17 years. I've been vilified for it. I'm pleased we've got a Prime Minister that now recognises it. There's just one part of the cog that's missing. We're still undervaluing genuine vocational training in this country. There are too many kids coming out of university with ologies that are not helping them in the workplace, whereas if they learn trades and skills, set up their own businesses, they will become part of the middle classes you talked about in your question.
Nigel, on this issue of the grammar school, and you're right, you have for a long time, certainly on this programme,
yes,
advocating their return. What is your response to the critics, two of them on this panel, who say that actually what they do is to allow schools to select talent and the others, intellectual talent, academic talent, and that the others who may have that talent that will develop in due course are left to one side, demoralised and damaged by it. What is your reaction to that?
Well, the whole point of it is that you don't just have an 11-year cut-off, you reassess at 13, and some go up and some go down. It's about having the top few percent academically together in an environment in which they will not be held back, because a class of pupils generally, academically, will march at the slower end of the pace of the class, not the upper end.
David?
You see, I agree with you, Nigel, for once, about the issue of vocational education. I did both. I did academic and vocational to get to university, and we can do that. But if we had a gifted and talented stream in every school, and if we tailored to those who have a vocational technical bent the education for their needs, we'd meet the challenge that you've described without separating children into an entirely different school.
Why haven't we?
There's been quite a lot of progress. I have to say, although I disagreed profoundly with some of the things that were done from 2010, a lot of the progress that's been made over the last 20 years is still continuing, and it's continuing, and you can see it in a school like this.
Thank you. Any answers on this? Again, the number 03700 100 444. And we will go to our next, please.
My name's Matilda Caswell, and my question is, do the panellists believe it is correct that the public is paying for the Buckingham Palace renovations?
It is proposed a temporary increase in the sovereign grant, it's called, which would take that grant up from 15% to 25% of the profits being devoted to the restoration of what is apparently regarded as a fire risk building if something is not done. To the 775 rooms, 78 bathrooms, 1,514 doors, 760 windows, 100 miles of electric cabling and 20 miles of heating pipework. Lord Blunkett.
Well, it's a good job Her Majesty's not subject to the bedroom tax in that case. I mean, obviously this is a national heritage. It's something that we want to see restored. We'd want to ensure it's maintained and available to the nation and to attracting visitors. I'd be more comfortable if the palace, if the royal family had said, look, we know this has got to be done on behalf of the nation, but we'll make a substantial contribution towards it. I'm not aware that whether they've done that, but if they haven't, and I was advising, God, I mustn't say I would advise the Queen. If I was advising Prince Charles, Jonathan, and you know him a lot better than I do, I'd say cough something up, because we'd all be a lot happier.
The money essentially comes from the Crown estates, and that money is sent to the Treasury, from which the Queen then normally has 25%, I think, 15%.
Yeah, it's
some
like us.
43. It's a grant.
We pay council tax.
Yeah.
It's called council tax
Yeah.
that we pay.
Emma.
Well, I mean, I think it's obviously of huge heritage importance, and it should be taken care of properly for the people. I'm not that fussed about the monarchy myself, so perhaps we could move them out and use some of those rooms for people who really need them. But yes, I think it should be preserved, and I think, you know, it is coming from the sovereign grant. If they would like to top that up themselves, I think we would all be very grateful to them.
Nigel Farage.
Well, Windsor Castle burnt down, didn't it? And why was that? Faulty wiring. And any of us know if we've got ancient wiring in our houses, we've got a problem. So, yes, it does need to be done. You know, the Houses of Parliament, Buckingham Palace, these are the iconic symbols that tourists come to see. And one of the great advantages of a weaker pound, of course, is that more tourists are coming to the country. So, yes, let's do it. Let's get on with it. How do we pay for it? I've got an idea.
Oh,
now,
dear.
I've got an idea. Now,
You got a friend we can borrow some money from.
I knew you'd like this. So, even though we voted Brexit, we're still members of the European Union. We're still paying a net 30 million quid a day into the Brussels coffers. Stop payments for a fortnight, all the costs are covered. Easy peasy.
And Sir Patrick.
Well, Nigel, you've spent that money so many times over on so many different...
Very good.
You must have ownership of the magic money tree, is all I can say.
Well, you better ask Boris about that, I think.
Having said that, look, from the reports I've read, some of the wiring at Buckingham Palace is 80 years old. Some of the maintenance has not been done. Of course, it's got to be done. It's a palace that's part of the United Kingdom. It represents. It is the office almost of the Queen, as well as residence of the Queen. And I think it should be done. The question is, Why have we let it get to the state we've got, let it get to, and it should have perhaps been done many years before and on a rolling programme.
I want to see if we can squeeze in one more, which will give the panellists each 10 seconds only to answer it. Could we have it, please?
Stephen Knight, which current influential person or persons would you like to talk to in a lift, and what would you say to them?
Who would you like to see in lift, and what would you say to them? Literally 15 seconds I can give you. Nigel Farage.
Donald Trump. Well done, mate.
Patrick McLaughlin.
Pope Francis. He could give me some divine information.
Intervention that will help you along your way. Emma.
Nigel
Emma
Farage,
Bride.
please be a better person than you are.
David Blanket.
Well, I think Angela Merkel, because I'd really like to say to you, you're a great leader, but honestly, you did sod up the referendum in Britain by inviting 1 million people in from Syria and beyond. God bless.
Nigel, just a quick word.
Yeah.
That lift that you were said to be
Well, it wasn't actually, the photograph of me with the Donald wasn't actually a lift. In fact, that was his front door. And he's got a gold front door with diamonds studded in it.
These are the people that Nigel associates with, and they appeal to the working class. It's great.
And that, yeah. And that from Lord Blunkett, member of the House of Lords.
Yeah.
Wonderful, isn't it?
I'm waiting till you get there,
Wonderful.
honestly.
Will you be, if he does get there, will you be the one who ushers him in? And
I shall usher him somewhere, I promise you.
Which takes us on that happy note to the end of this week's programme. Next week we're going to be in the UTC, which is one of these university technical colleges, of which we touched on just now in passing, in the Sheffield Olympic Legacy Park. And there are, I'm told, tickets there. You can apply still to the college via their website, which is utcsheffield.org.uk. From here, thank you to our panel. Thank you to Westwood College in Leek. Goodbye.
Any questions came from Westwood College in Leek in Staffordshire. On the panel were the Labour peer Lord Blunkett, the interim leader of UKIP Nigel Farage, the author Emma McBride and the chairman of the Conservative Party Sir Patrick McLaughlin. The chairman was Jonathan Dimbleby and the producer was Lisa Jenkinson.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.